everybody, to the Therapist Take. We're going to talk about vulnerability as being the lifeblood of a healthy relationship, so don't go anywhere. Hey, Carrie.
Hey, Josh.
How are you?
Good.
Feeling vulnerable today?
Nope.
Adjust my mic, sorry.
I know.
Is this vulnerable for you to do?
To talk about vulnerability?
Yeah.
No, I'll do it in a very unvulnerable way.
Is the
How's that?
podcast vulnerable
Yeah.
for you to
it
do?
is.
I think it,
Do you?
yeah, it is for me, but I mean, I think it might be a little bit more for you. I really honestly don't like being in front of the cameras
I know. I don't either.
that much.
I don't
But
either. I don't at all.
I do like the discussions and broadcasting the discuss. That doesn't make me feel
I like talking
as
with you.
vulnerable.
That doesn't make me feel as vulnerable.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's really sweet.
Well, you know that already, right?
Well, you wonder, you know.
Yeah.
But
you
it's
wonder.
nice to hear it
when
validated.
I'm teasing
Yeah.
you or griping at you, you wonder.
Yeah, I don't ask because once you ask and it's before you get the answer, it can be whatever you want it to be
That's
in your
right.
imagination,
It can
right?
stay, yeah.
So, but thankfully you said that it.
So now you're not as vulnerable.
Yeah, yeah.
See, look at us.
That's all this was for. We can stop doing this now.
We can
I
end.
don't even know what we're going to talk about. Made my day.
Good.
No. So we were kind of looking for. We've talked about some heavy things. I feel like recently we did the podcast episode on the holidays, and of course we're still in the middle of the holidays. And I was thinking, maybe we could do another holiday one, but I think if people listening to this, if you go back and listen to the Thanksgiving special that we did, I think we covered some ground with it. So there's some really good information. It's a 2-part series. We had our friends Shannon and Whitney on with us, and I felt like it went really well. So it's a really good episode. But so we're talking about vulnerability as the lifeblood of a healthy relationship. So it's supposed to be kind of a lighter topic, but
It's really.
we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But before we get started, just want to cover the basic housekeeping things. Just reminding everybody to please, if you're watching this on YouTube, to subscribe to the channel. Go ahead and smash that like button, is what they say on there. So I'm going to start saying smash it. Okay. Smash the like button.
Okay. It makes me think of your baseball love.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I was thinking Hulk.
Oh, yeah, that's true, too. Yeah.
But
Hulk smash.
So hit that like button, smash it. And then if you're listening to this on the audio platforms, please just stop what you're doing just for a quick second and go give us a 5-star review. And then if you have a couple spare minutes, you can write something kind about your listening experience on the content that we're putting out there. So this it's a very nice thing for us to read, and it makes us feel good. But at the same time, the main objective is really to please the different algorithms so that the content can get out to more people. And so, okay, so now let's real quickly, I'm going to give you guys the episode breakdown to kind of just tell you what we're going to be talking about today. So in talking about vulnerability as the lifeblood of a healthy relationship, we're going to start with just kind of divining little Freudian slip there, defining what vulnerability means, what it means to us as clinicians, and move on from there into talking about this idea that there's no such thing as risk-free intimacy. So hope that's got your attention. Then there's this question of how much is too much, or is there such a thing of there being too much vulnerability? Is there a certain point where it's too risky, basically? And then moving from there into just some practical, actionable steps to kind of move you toward vulnerability in your relationships. So that's what we're going to do.
Okay.
How you feeling about it?
Easy.
Easy breezy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am always impressed because I basically come up with the topics and prepare all this, and you come in like nothing scares you. So
I trust you. I trust the way you're going to lead the conversation.
Man, you know how much pressure that puts on me right now? I'm looking through my notes going, man, I hope I didn't,
Yeah.
There's this one part where I was going to try to trip you up a little bit, but I crossed that out.
Well, good.
Yeah, it makes me feel very vulnerable.
Good. Well, good.
But it's interesting, we talk about that, like vulnerability, like when you feel vulnerable, and like even when we're playing like that, like makes me feel very vulnerable. Like it's like it would be like the impression of a child, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
it makes me feel very vulnerable. Now, all of a sudden, I don't feel 30, 35 anymore. I feel more like I'm 5. You
Little.
know, yeah, when you feel vulnerable. So vulnerability does have a way of kind of accessing a part of you that feels much younger,
Yes.
usually,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely.
And so I'm sure we'll be bringing that up eventually. So I don't think I told you what the topic was until this morning. So what was the first thing that happened to you when you first read the topic? Because I think I just gave you the
Well, my first thought was that's good. You know, I talk about vulnerability all
yeah.
the time. And then what happened to me? Like, what did I feel or what did my body do? I think just the vastness of it was probably
Right.
like, oh, hope we can keep it
Right.
not just meandering.
Right. I am having a little bit of a squirrel moment. Can I just?
As usual, yes.
Is that your Coke Zero
Yeah, it is.
back there? Okay.
I wondered when you would say you want one.
Well,
And then
it's
I
like
thought, why didn't I bring one for Josh?
it's almost as bad as having those nerd clusters out in
I
the basket
know.
out there. Like I just can't stop thinking about that Coke Zero
I
right now.
know. It's how good it tastes.
I know.
Sorry, I should have
It's
brought
all
it
right.
in.
You know what's the one thing that keeps me from grabbing it right now is the lipstick that's all over the
Good.
top
That's
of it. I'm like,
part of the reason that women put lipstick on is so that it marks your beverage.
that's not true. Is that really?
Oh well, my kids won't drink if they see lipstick.
But do you put lipstick on? You're going like I'm
In
going to
an
make a glass of
attempt to
wine. I need to make sure Nick doesn't figure out it's
no, I mean not that necessary. But I mean I do like that my kids won't drink after me after that because everything that's mine they think is theirs.
right.
Ew, mom.
Yeah,
Don't drink it. Get your own.
I kind of think that's why my wife started drinking alcohol.
You do.
Yeah, because it's the one drink that she can say, no, you can't have that.
Yeah, she's just the only way to have anything that's her own.
Yes, and I'm like, I don't like most alcohol, so I'm like, well, I want one that's just mine. I'm like, I don't think my kids should be allowed to drink bubbly
Okay.
because it's like, you need to drink. You didn't even drink out of a hose yet.
You can't be drinking special
You can't be
water.
drinking water out of a can. I'm like, you hadn't earned your stripes.
That's funny.
I drink out of a water hose.
There's a ranking system here now in your head. Do you hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I drink out of a hose. I remember how it tastes.
Yes,
I can
you're
taste it immediately when
darn
you say
Skippy.
that.
We're Gen Xers.
Yeah. I know.
There's a lot of things.
There's a lot of things.
It's probably why we never get sick.
True.
Our immune
Maybe
system's
so.
always-
We can thank the hose.
Yeah, thank the water hose. All the immunity we built up.
Yeah.
Because we drink out of water hoses.
Probably.
Right. Okay. Well,
Okay, squirrel.
Yeah,
Back to vulnerability.
Squirrel moment. Sorry, guys. I'll make sure to put a tag in the description in the chapters section. It says squirrel moment. So you can just skip over it if you want.
Right.
And on that note, since I didn't mention it, please always make sure you check out the description of the video or the show notes if you're listening to this. I really do try to put a lot of different resources, and in the description, I'll also try to make our descriptors a little bit more blog-like, just so like if you're pulling it up and you're trying to decide if you want to listen to it, you can kind of read about it first, but also if you're just feel like reading that day and you don't necessarily want to listen. So it's not going to capture everything, all the splendor that it is to be us talking about it.
All the squirrel moments.
But you can basically get the nuts and bolts out of it. So, okay, so let's start with talking about the first thing on defining vulnerability. And the way I want to start with that is I printed out not Webster's. It's actually, I think this definition comes from, it's a Microsoft Bing definition. So you know how like when you just Google it on, or what do they call it on Bing? Bing it?
Search.
When you search it on Bing, and then it just pulls up the little definition. I think in the description I said it was Oxford, but it's powered by some kind of Oxford language thing. So the way it reads on that definition, it just says vulnerability is the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed either physically or emotionally. I think it's a pretty good. I think it's a good baseline definition.
Good.
I mean, but it definitely, when it gets into what we're talking about, is a little bit different.
Yeah, I think it's a step.
Yeah.
Well, we're going for of course, we're looking at it from the relational
Mm-hmm.
psychological perspective most
Yeah.
of the time.
But in terms of like a foundational
Yep.
definition, it's, you know, the state or the quality or state of being exposed to the
I
possibility
like
of
that.
being harmed. I
Yeah.
mean, that's in essence really what it is,
I like that it says quality or
Yeah.
state.
And it also distinguishes physically or
Yep.
it's
Or
either
emotionally.
physically or emotionally, it doesn't, or really.
Yeah.
So, but then old Chat GBT,
It's
what
doing
would we do
well.
without our buddy
You'll
Chat?
never know.
But I went ahead and just put it in Chat GBT to see kind of what definition he. Chat sounds like
She.
Chad
It does sound
to
like
me.
Chad. I do think
There
that.
needs to be like
Yeah. Let's just they it since
they,
we don't
yeah,
want to masculine make
right.
it
Probably
masculine.
because they are, see, pulling
Good
from a lot
job.
of different resources.
Yes.
So what ChatGPT said was vulnerability is the willingness to show up. To show up authentically, express your feelings, and let others see the real you, even when it feels uncomfortable or uncertain.
It's pretty good.
I think it's better for sure.
Well, it's
Yeah.
better for us. I mean, I think vulnerable to like physical, like, you need to wear a seatbelt because you're vulnerable to bodily harm in a car accident. The first definition definitely speaks more to that. This one definitely knows its audience, Josh, when it gave you that definition. Chad
Yeah.
knows who they're talking to.
Yeah, that's right. Because
Right.
it's logging in all
Yes.
so somebody else might type it in on ChatGPT, give it a completely different.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
ChatGPT's going like, for you,
For you,
you just
doctor,
need to
nurse.
just be
Yeah.
still.
Yeah, right. You are vulnerable, be still.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that does I mean, it is a fitting definition. Um, of course, authenticity, which we did
Yes.
an episode on that because I think one year the word of the year for like Webster's word of the year was gaslighting, and the next year it was authenticity,
I
right? So
remember
we
that.
actually did
We did, yeah.
an episode on that and talked about it. So um, what authenticity looks like for any given person is going to be different, right? And that's really up to each individual to determine for themselves what's authentic. But um, authenticity, I don't necessarily think requires us to show up expressing our feelings, and I can still be vulnerable and not do that. So
That's
that's
right.
one of the, even though I do think expressing your feelings is part of vulnerability, I think you can be vulnerable without expressing your feelings,
Yes, I agree.
and also still be authentic at the same time.
Yes.
And I think you can also be vulnerable without letting others see the real you. So like I said, I think it's a good working definition. But I mean, it fits with what vulnerability is. But um, vulnerability is really nuanced to different people in different situations. Would you agree?
I agree. Yes.
Right. So
Yes.
like if
Contexts.
right, so we were talking about like the person that needs to be still versus the person that needs to move. Right.
Yeah.
So it's to one, being still might be not being vulnerable, and to someone else it's vulnerable, but to somebody else getting up and taking action might be vulnerable, and somebody else it's not.
Right.
Kind of like we were talking about, this is a little less vulnerable for me than it is for you.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's individualized, right?
Right.
But it's also context specific too, right? Sometimes it's expected to be authentic, and
Right.
sometimes everybody knows your best foot forward,
Right.
right?
So what would you say are the common denominators are, despite the definition, that you're probably going, this is what you're looking for to determine this is vulnerable.
I think genuineness is kind of, to reference the definition.
Right.
I think that's key. I think it requires courage,
Right.
whether it's measurable by an outside source or not. Like there's some way to say, "Oh gosh, I was vulnerable, even though it was potentially risky
Right.
or harmful or difficult."
Right. So that would also mean that fear would have to be involved, right?
Yes, courage, right, is the recognition of fear, and as they say, what doing
Right.
it anyways.
Right. So yeah, I agree. Like I think, with the being definition, kind of being a really good baseline, and then ChatGPT is, definitely one of the a definition of being vulnerable. But I think really what it captures, for me anyways, what it means to be vulnerable is that you really have to experience like an uneasiness, like a disturbance, and it's not supposed to be easy. So like if somewhere in the definition, if I were writing it, and we could work in something about not taking the path of least resistance.
Oh, yeah.
I think that might be a common denominator. So whether that means expressing your feelings, sometimes it's not. Sometimes
Yeah.
being vulnerable is to keep your feelings to yourself, as we can
Yes.
see on like Facebook a
Yeah.
lot, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes people just need to keep it to themselves,
Sure.
so keeping thoughts or feelings, and sometimes you need to speak up.
Yes. Right.
You know, and that to me is what really captures vulnerability. How's that work out relationally, you think? Like, how do you see that playing out in your mind on what this looks like and the different varieties of vulnerability for a couple?
For a couple relationship. I think, I mean, hopefully it looks like mutual vulnerability, right?
Well, yeah, I would say that's what we're aiming for
Yeah.
sure.
Right. That it's a level of disclosure. It's hopefully it's, when we talk about with clients a lot, right? Like you want your insides to match your outsides.
Yeah.
So when you're in a coupleship, when you're in a committed relationship, hopefully you can be authentic and that what you're saying and doing matches. There's not a performance, there's not a holding back or a withholding, right?
Right.
And that's going to be a marker that relationship is intimate. I mean, the presence of vulnerability is the indicator of intimacy, right?
Yeah, for sure. Do you see couples missing it? Like, and I'm sure you have, so I'm asking the question I don't really know the answer to, but the when ever had a situation in a session where a couple's talking to you and what they're saying, they're actually describing the experience of somebody being vulnerable, and it completely either over their head or they're defensive against it, or something like that. They completely miss the opportunity to
Yeah, I do think, and I
to
do think that
connect.
I think when you are, especially when you're stressed or in survival mode, you can miss the cues, the indicators, the experience right before you of somebody demonstrating vulnerability.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think, and this is something I talk to clients about too, is vulnerability begets vulnerability.
I think that's true.
And so, like, if you're a couple listening to this, like, vulnerability is the lifeblood of a healthy relationship. So you have to be vulnerable. But if you've had a period of time in your relationship where it's difficult, there's a lot of conflict, and you're having trouble being vulnerable, and so you start doing some of the work to be vulnerable. Well, what that's going to do to your partner is make them automatically feel vulnerable, and they often, it's unsettling because, like I just said, vulnerability is meant to be unsettling. But you made me feel vulnerable, and I wasn't prepared for
Yeah,
it, and so
yeah.
then my body tries to work itself out of that vulnerability, and then fights kind of get started.
Start
Like,
happening. Yeah, sure.
so, yeah, I think a lot of us can relate to that time when I'm like, I'm just gonna speak. I'm gonna bring this up, and then all is like, oh, that didn't go well,
Yes, sure,
right?
sure.
And yeah, and it's like, and then of course the argument is like, I thought this is what you wanted. Like, I thought you wanted me to open up, like you
Right.
wanted me to speak, or I thought you wanted me to do this better, that better, or whatever. And it is what partners want, but
Yes.
at the same time, our brains aren't really taking into consideration is the process of getting there, where it's kind of vulnerability becomes kind of a fluid state in the relationship. And so when your partner sees that vulnerability sometimes for the first time, but a
Right.
lot of times in not a long time, I mean in a very long time, um, it's alarming,
Yeah.
and they respond to that alarm.
They respond to that alarm, and you have to remember denial is such an automatic response for us, right? That,
Sure.
they're not being vulnerable.
Right.
they're whatever, right? And so the denial becomes a way to, kind of jump you into defensive protection mode, right?
You're right.
So yeah, I get, and again, this is something that you'll see when there either hasn't been the presence of vulnerability or it hasn't been there in a long time, right?
Right.
And so sometimes I'll even help people shift from denial to skepticism, right? Oh, you were kind of maybe skeptical about, was that your partner being vulnerable, right? Which actually that starts inviting vulnerability.
Right. Yeah, a good example that I thought was really cool that I saw done in a presentation once, where someone was trying to illustrate how vulnerability begets vulnerability, is like they brought two people up on stage. They're in front of a big audience, right? And they brought two people up on stage, and then he just had the presenter had these two people, I think were of the same sex, and he's kind of inching them in closer and closer into each other's space, right? And they of course, start to get uncomfortable,
Yeah,
and it's not because of their sexuality, just because you're in each other's space,
the bubble.
right? A stranger that I don't know, and he keeps inching us closer and closer. Well, eventually, one of the participants, I think, kind of like blows a kiss at the other one, right? And then the entire audience breaks out in laughter, right? So the presenter said, "All right, so what you just experienced was, me putting them in a position where they are feeling vulnerable as I inched them closer together, and because of that vulnerability, that it got so uncomfortable that one of them felt compelled to blow a kiss at the other one, right? To kind of break that vulnerability, to kind of break out of it, right?
Right.
But then he points out, he goes, and then all of you laughed. He's like, it wasn't funny. It's not funny. Blowing a kiss at somebody, like it's like, so why did you laugh? Because all of you were feeling vulnerable too, watching it happen. And I thought that was just such a really good
That is such a
example
good example.
of how vulnerability happens and how we naturally want to respond to it because it starts to feel dangerous sometimes. And what did that do? It broke the tension of danger is what it felt like, and same thing with the audience laughing, like,
Yeah.
oh, they're not
Oh,
going to kill
they're
each other.
funny. Right.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So a really good example.
Yeah, good example.
And so if you can imagine that happening in a couple relationship where maybe somebody's got to sit down and give an apology, or someone needs to speak up about something that they've been just kind of been on their mind and they haven't been talking about it, and it's time to talk about it, and then they do it, and then the other person experiences that vulnerability themselves, and you just kind of got to kind of broaden your expectations on what may or may not happen when this person just unannounced experiences this vulnerability.
It can be.
Yeah.
You can see why people would get tense,
Yeah.
right? Oh, I didn't know this is what game we were
We're not
playing.
removed from it either. I mean, it happens to me.
And well, yeah, it happens to us, but it happens to us as therapists too, right?
It absolutely happens
Sure.
to us as therapists. You
Yeah.
know, and so, um, but that's where we talk about in consultations a lot about what we call self of therapists when sometimes when we're in the room with clients, it's recognizing our own part in the emotional climate
Yes.
in the room can be difficult. It's hard to see the forest for the trees sometimes. That's why consultations and having that with your colleagues is so important. And and so like if I'm consulting with you about a case or something, you might pull me out of kind of a kind of a helicopter view, and kind of look in on the situation and like, how is what you were feeling contributing to what's happening? And then from there, we have like points of intervention. For me, like sometimes we gotta just tell our clients, like, when this happened, this is how I was feeling.
Right.
And but anyways, I don't know if that
The
was on track what we were talking
yeah,
about, but
being
yeah.
vulnerable. Yeah.
Okay, so we've kind of, and established what we're talking about. Hope you guys kind of get the picture of what we're talking about when it comes to vulnerability in relationships and why. This is not a question I was planning on asking, but just out of curiosity, like, Why would you say, or do you agree that vulnerability is the lifeblood of a healthy relationship? Sounds like a
Probably.
vampire.
And it does. I
Yeah.
do think that when you say it. So yeah, part of me smiling a
But so
little
what
bit.
makes it the lifeblood? Like what? Why is this so important? I guess is the
I think it's because, well, and so one thing that comes to mind right away is it distinguishes it from other relationships, right? And I think you have to
yeah
remember that when we're thinking about partnering up with somebody, we really want to feel special. We
yeah
want to feel like we make the other person feel special and chosen, and vice versa, right? So if you know that that the truth about me, the authentic me, then we're special, right? It's a
yeah
gift. It's precious,
yeah
etc.
yeah. And so there are varying degrees, basically, like
I think there are, yeah.
because there's vulnerability in a handshake, right?
And this
Yeah.
is something
So
as therapists, I mean, especially for
right.
people that struggle with things like love addiction. Don't you find yourself, thinking about? I think about Patrick Carnes, kind of as we refer to him, the godfather of sex addiction treatment. He has those stages of courtship, where really stages of courtship are about helping people build intimacy and vulnerability, like appropriate levels of it,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? We
Sure.
can get to that in recommendations, but that's there to say, hey, yeah, you don't have to tell, the checkout person at the grocery store about your extremely personal health information.
Yeah.
Right.
About your
About your
colonoscopy.
colonoscopy,
Right.
right? But you can
Yeah.
tell that's things you tell people that you have
Right.
some kind of closer relationship,
Right.
right?
Yeah. So that can get into boundary stuff. We're gonna talk
Right.
about
But
that.
that's a level of intimacy. Like,
Sure.
I think if I
Yeah.
tell you something very personal, that reflects
Yeah.
my trust in you,
Sure.
reflects that I can be vulnerable. I choose to be
Right.
vulnerable with you.
Right. And I would say like the committed couple relationship is at the peak of that extreme. So like if you look at vulnerability as on a continuum, what relationships get the highest level of
Right.
vulnerability, those do. And so that's why, so like if you're wondering, which happens a lot, people say like, how come I go to work and like I just feel like respected. I feel like I'm a good communicator, and then I go home and there's just
Can't talk to my
we
partner.
can't get nothing gets across the way it's supposed to, and I'm just as guilty as she is, or whatever. Whether it's vulnerability and the level of vulnerability you're experiencing, like the level of emotional investment into this relationship we call committed relationship is far beyond what it would be for
A work
a work
relationship.
relationship or most other relationships for that matter. So so that's why, and that so a lot of people are smart, educated, they know how to communicate, and they do it in their jobs. They've
They do it
advanced
with
in life very
acquaintances.
well,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden we have trouble doing it here, and it's because of this emotional element.
Sure. The emotional element, which makes it there for the lifeblood.
Right.
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 Because that's what
Exactly.
makes it significant and
Right.
nutritious.
So if you've ever experienced pulling back or your partner pulling back, it doesn't work, right? Because you're just like pulling back the life source for the relationship, not the life source for the individual, but just for the
The
relationship.
relationship, right.
So one thing that I often have said, and we've talked about before with clients, particularly when we work with betrayal trauma clients, because um, clients that are caught up in habitual sexual behaviors and in infidelity and things like that, they're often trying to accomplish this phenomenon that we call risk-free intimacy. So the fear of attaching, the fear of getting close to somebody else, they can kind of enter into a fantasy world. And what I say, there's only one world where risk-free intimacy exists, and it's in the fantasy world, which isn't real.
Right.
So if it's
Right.
not,
If it's not
so which
real,
means there's no risk-free intimacy isn't real. There's no such thing.
yeah,
Uh,
it's a bummer.
So, right.
And you can see people and think of people and situations that people have tried their very best. They've been very diligent at trying to find the exception to this,
Right.
right?
Yeah, an example I use is like a pendulum, So since I don't have an ink pen on me, I'm gonna use like if I have an upside down pendulum here, but like if this is your intimacy pendulum, and then and I get into a couple relationship, I can, as intimacy increases, like I'm getting closer and closer, and where things are going well and it's a really good experience. But what people that operate in reality also kind of understand, at least on an intuitive level, is that as the intimacy increases over here, the pendulum can swing just as far the other way into the realm of like despair, for example, and some of the other more difficult feelings. So it's like climbing a ladder. You know, the higher you go, you're accomplishing something. You're getting to where you're wanting to go, but you're also further away from the ground. And I remember my excuse me. I remember my son asking me or telling me a riddle once, or asking me a riddle, saying, how do you jump off of a 20-foot ladder onto solid concrete and not get hurt?
How?
You jump off the bottom rung, and I was like, that's a great illustration for this, for what people are trying to do with intimacy. Is they're trying to get on this ladder, and they want to pretend they're climbing, but what they're really doing is hoping that, they want to experience all the great things that come with intimacy, but the pendulum just stops here. Like there's not, in their minds, there's not another side, right? But that's not intimacy. It can't be. It's got to have the counterpart to make this worth it. I don't know if the ladder analogy works. There's always there's always holes in metaphors at some point. Stop judging me.
Yeah. Don't
I'm
think
gonna
too
hide
much.
behind my mic.
No, I'm not judging. I'm
No.
thinking about it. I'm thinking about what the
I
visual.
was talking to them.
Okay. Good. That probably worked.
Harry, you're not judgmental.
No.
I don't perceive you as judgmental.
Thank you. I hope not.
I don't. But yeah, to that point though, is that if I'm somebody that only feels safe on that bottom step, and if I don't want to face the reality of having a less than intimate experience relationally, I start creating ideas on what intimacy is, and that's when people often find themselves going into other relationships or getting lost into
world.
Right, or pornography or whatever, and kind of thinking that that's intimacy.
So we're really bumming people out. It's kind of, it goes together, right?
Yeah.
Risk and
right.
reward.
Risk and reward, right. So if there's no risk involved in it, then it's not intimacy.
Right.
So I don't know why it has to be that way. It's just the way it is.
Well, that's another episode.
Right. Yeah. So we kind of established like there's we can move on to the next point, but it's like that there's no such thing as risk-free intimacy. So that kind of falls in line with our definition too of like that if you're not feeling a sensation of fear and discomfort, right? It's not intimacy, and it's not vulnerability.
Right.
So, okay. Let's talk about the question of can someone be too vulnerable, and if so, like how much is too much? Like how are they supposed to know like that I'm being too vulnerable right here?
Yes, there can be too much vulnerability.
Sure.
But it's of course it's like, but let's talk about what it means, right?
Yeah.
I think too much vulnerability maybe looks like one-sided vulnerability in a relationship, right? So someone is willing to put themselves out there emotionally. They're demonstrating, they're telling the truth, they're genuine, and they're not getting it back. And I don't mean that it's wrong to do that. I just mean you're probably not going to get what you want. So it kind of runs a little bit similar, but also counter to what you said, that vulnerability begets vulnerability, right? And I do think that if we're using vulnerability as a tool to invite others to be vulnerable with us in return, I think that's great, but we can't guarantee that will actually happen. Right? Somebody may be unwilling to put, their stuff. They just may not reflect back.
Right. Yeah. So I think there's also another side of that too, which kind of goes back to the person at the checkout counter. We have the concept of TMI, too much information.
Right.
When you're looking for red flags, so sometimes you can experience somebody else being too vulnerable.
Yes.
With you, like this is too soon. So I think of like a dating relationship, for example.
Right, I was thinking that.
And someone starts talking about something, you're like, well, that was awfully quick to dive into that topic.
Right.
Or, oh,
Right.
you want me to meet your parents? Like it's a second date,
Right. Right.
or they're talking a lot about their relationship they just got out of or
Right.
something. So there's obviously something going on for this person, but those are red flags, right? Like, and those red flags are so often ignored.
Yes, I would agree. Blown past. Yeah.
Right. So on one side of it is like paying attention to when somebody else is being too vulnerable. So the level of vulnerability that they're sending your direction is just contextually inappropriate or abnormal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then what you're talking about is that when the level of vulnerability is actually appropriate, but it's not being reciprocated
Sure. Yeah. That's
back,
very distinguished. Yeah.
right? And now then, of course, at some point in time, that person will have to be able to determine that my level of vulnerability is now inappropriate because I'm not getting that reciprocation.
Yes.
And we
Yes.
often will see people that won't do that.
Right.
They'll just keep giving and keep giving and keep giving
Yeah.
in that way, and just hope that
Yes.
someday this person gives back.
Right. Right. But there's a cost to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What, like what?
Your exhaustion. You get hurt. You can get manipulated. You end up feeling lonely. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that being vulnerable is courageous, but like anything, it's a precious resource.
Right.
Right.
So this is tricky because this is where, at some point, if you are being vulnerable and you're realizing that your vulnerability, you're giving more than you're fairly receiving in return, and you don't back off that vulnerability to appropriate levels, or have different types of vulnerable discussions with your partner, like come to Jesus meetings type thing, but yet you just keep doing it, I would say you are no longer being vulnerable.
And what would you say is happening instead?
Because I think being vulnerable would to be not be vulnerable in that point.
Okay.
Like the hard thing to do is to do for self, in that, like to back off. Like I'm not willing to give like this anymore, and that's vulnerability
I agree.
because
It is.
the risk is losing you.
That's right. That's right.
Right. So the reason I gave so much in the beginning was risk of losing you, but I've kind of,
Come full circle.
yeah, full circle or flip to the other extreme, and now I'm afraid to not give because I don't want to lose you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why vulnerability gets real tricky.
Yeah, and I think too that, again, like I'm even thinking as you're talking the parent-child relationship where, parents give and are willing to accept more vulnerability than the child gives to the parent. But why that works is you're cool with it. Like the parent understands it.
Yeah.
What you're talking about there is more of what would be a more mutual relationship, a romantic or
Yeah, we're talking about basically
partners.
peer-to-peer
Right.
type relationships. Like,
same level to same level.
yeah, you're talking about like hierarchical relationships, and those are really different. Vulnerability
Very
looks
vulnerable.
really different. The distribution.
Yes.
In fact, there's virtually, as parents, we just don't expect we don't get anything kind of lifebloody from our kids being vulnerable back to us. Like I'm okay whether my kids are vulnerable to me or not,
Right,
but
right.
my kids won't be okay if
If
I'm
I'm
not
not.
vulnerable with them.
Right. Right.
Right.
Just different.
Exactly.
Totally different.
Because the objectives are different and the relationship is completely different. But yes, on a peer-to-peer, these are parent. Would you agree that a parent-child relationship isn't a give and take?
No, it's not.
Right.
Everyone who's a parent knows.
Right.
Or should know.
This is just a give.
It's only giving.
Oh yeah, no. I think parents were like, I take a lot of shit.
Yeah, that's why the lipstick on the drink. See,
Right. It is a give and take.
it's a give and take.
But
And other hierarchical, like an employer to an employee. The employee comes in, is having a hard time, tells the boss is not going to respond. Well, let me tell you about my hard time, right? So
that's a great example.
We're
Yeah.
talking about hierarchical relationships
Yeah.
in this situation, but
Right.
but yes, peer to peer on the same level.
Exactly. So using the work example, two employees come into each other and say, I had a really hard day. And the other one says, oh yeah, let me tell you about mine too, you know, and like they can do that.
Right,
It's
right.
different from in the
Employer
other
to
one, right?
employee, yeah.
So, so we're talking about give and take relationships, which is kind of, it's not romantic. It's not, you know, I mean, we like to think of, you know, the you complete me, Jerry
You make me
Maguire,
feel everything I need.
right, and unconditional love. And
Yeah.
as much as I do think there is a level of unconditional love involved in couple relationships, it only goes as far as the emotion itself. So, in other words, um, the love, no matter what you've done, the love, unconditional love I have for you makes it hard for me to just leave you. Like if you had an affair or something, the unconditional love is what got me into the therapy office with you, because the easy, how many couples we've heard say that? Like it just would have been
Millions, it
easier
feels
if I
like,
just
yeah.
could stop loving this
Yeah,
person,
yeah.
right?
If I didn't let feelings be easy,
Right.
I know what to
So
do.
the give and take piece comes in the action part of love, right? Which if you have one part of love that's unconditional, another part that is conditional, to me it's all conditional then,
Yeah,
right?
I think
You
it's
know, it's
salt
like
water and fresh
exactly
water. Yeah.
right. And so um, so in these give and take type relationships, you know, there is a reasonable expectation of vulnerability from your partner. And if you're not receiving that, and you're unwilling to acknowledge that to your partner, then that means that you are now not being vulnerable
Yes, right. Right.
in the relationship, because you're afraid to do something that needs to be done, basically. Um, which goes back to the path of least resistance.
Yeah, and
type
again,
thing.
though, to back to kind of where you started, what makes this interesting is sometimes that is appropriate.
Yeah,
That would be the most vulnerable thing to do to stop being
sure.
vulnerable. Yeah.
We should probably do a little disclaimer though about like dangerous people.
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Like, so there's a, you know, like I wouldn't want somebody in a domestic violence situation to listen to this podcast and go, you know what, I'm going to speak up,
I need to speak
and then
up
you
and
get
be
hurt.
vulnerable. Right.
The vulnerable thing really to do in those situations is to reach out to for help,
Help,
you
support.
know,
Yeah.
but also don't want people listening to this to think because I had a hard time with that, that makes you weak somehow. There are people in certain situations where there is a psychological phenomenon that's happening that makes taking action steps for your well-being very, very difficult to do. And they see it on the other side of it, and especially victims of domestic violence, and they finally get out
Yes.
and they look back and they feel all this intense shame and guilt for why they didn't do it sooner. It's like you got to show some grace towards yourself, because there is, I think it's a scientific
Yeah.
phenomenon. I don't know enough about it to be able to adequately explain it here, but that's happening in the brain, that this is not the same as, uh, you know, I need to talk to my partner about, you know, something that they did that hurt my feelings the other day. It's a completely different
Yeah. Yeah.
thing. So
Yeah.
just want to put that disclaimer out
Okay, I
there.
appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay, so we established, you know, you can experience too much vulnerability. You can also
Yes.
experience too much from somebody else, and that being a red flag relationally,
Yes.
but also a red flag for yourself of um, that I need, the vulnerable thing for me to do might be to not do something.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
to be still, some of kind of the things that we don't typically think about. All right, so last thing to talk about is just action steps. Like if someone listening to this, like what would
I stink at this. I'm not good at being vulnerable or something like that. I have clients say that, don't
oh, I
you?
thought you were saying, I was
Oh,
like, Carrie, I
no.
wanted to say, like, yeah, you're fine.
Comfort
You're
me
doing
immediately.
great.
I'm not worried about it. No, but
But
like,
Rebecca over there, though,
I know, maybe so.
is filling in for Hannah
I know.
today,
She's,
working our slides.
I know. Good
Yeah.
job. She's vulnerable now that you called her out.
That's not
But
a
I
real
think
name.
the actionable steps, right, or what do I do to either become better at being vulnerable or to be better at it in my relationship? People do talk to us about that a lot,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, it's, these are actually, by the way, these are hard questions for therapists to answer.
Oh, we're so annoying at this because we
Yeah,
don't
this is
just
when
like
we get
spit it out.
right, because I wish I could, sometimes I wish I was like that. I even have talked to my wife about this, about like sometimes I just wish I could just be a black and white thinker and just be like, you know what you need to do
Remember
is,
the other day we were like, don't you feel sorry for our kids sometimes when
oh
they ask us
gosh,
things and we're like,
I feel so bad for him. I did
well,
it again to my son. Man, this kid, I had a parent fail, and I did a repair. Which, by the way, I want to do an episode on repair
okay,
attempts.
okay.
But I did a repair with him, and he sent me a text later. Really sweet kid. Sent me a text later, just um, saying, thank you, I love you, and a couple of other things,
Precious.
and I was like, son, uh, one of the hardest things about being a parent. Sorry, I'm embarrassed. One of the hardest things about being a parent is not knowing how you hurt your kids.
Yeah.
And then I was like, and you won't know either, fully, until you're
Oh
probably
God.
much older. And then I was like, but when that day comes, you can always come talk to me.
Oh,
Oh man,
so sweet. And you're also
I
like,
feel
just
vulnerable.
shut up,
And then
right? Shh.
I was like, and I said, and so there was some kind of, like statement, like, you remember that, da 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 da. And I went this like that, and like this 2 paragraphs, right? And then he texts me back,
Okay.
I will. That was it.
Have you seen those jokes going around about like how if you read your text between parent and teen that it looks like an abusive relationship? Because it's the same thing. It's all of this
Oh,
nice language and then
yes.
K.
Yeah.
And it's just, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
That's
That's what it
great.
makes me think.
But
Yeah.
yes, we do our kids. Oh,
I know.
um, so but what I will say to the action steps, is just so we can give you something, is
Yeah.
that um, you got to have some self awareness skill
That's what I think
building
it is.
that's
Yeah.
got to start
Yeah.
first, right? And I think is really paying attention to what's happening inside of you,
Yes.
and so that fear, like, am I afraid to, and then being willing to get into dialogue with yourself. Something I really like to work with clients on is like a literal dialogue with yourself,
Yes. I
of
love it.
going down the rabbit hole of asking yourself all the questions your kids would ask you when they're like, why,
Yeah.
why,
Right.
why, like, but to do that, you're like, why do I feel this? Why does my brain think I need to feel this right now? Why am I a grown person, and I'm terrified of asking what seemingly is is a simple question.
Or
Nothing
speaking up
scary.
about something.
Right.
Right.
Why I have such a hard time with this,
Yeah.
and then
The
when
self awareness skills.
right, and that's kind of a place to begin, because you're really looking at like your own red flags, like,
That's a good way to say it.
but then, you know um, being willing to also ask yourself the question of like, what is my partner doing that makes this more difficult for me? And I think that's an important piece, because I'm not blaming my partner. I'm
Yeah.
recognizing
Right.
that they're not making me
No one
like
can
this.
make you. Right.
Right. But they definitely can make it more difficult.
Right.
So if I am feeling some fear toward them, maybe I shouldn't be feeling a debilitative fear, but none at all might not be the answer
Might
to
be
that
reasonable.
either, right?
Right.
So like,
Both and. It's a me thing and what's happening in the relationship.
right.
Well, I think the self awareness piece, and I would just add that, again, like I do often, like what's happening in your body, right? When you notice that you have this certain response to being vulnerable or not being vulnerable, right? Where is that in your body? What does that location mean to you? How do you know? How do you start recognizing it faster? Because when you've been someone who numbs or stays cognitive and doesn't take in body information, you may down the road go, ooh, I really missed the boat. Right when my stomach twisted, that was my noticing that was my body screaming,
Right.
hey, this is an opportunity, right, or whatever. So I think building on that self awareness I work with lots of women that will say to me very often, I don't know what I like. I don't know. How do I be vulnerable if I don't know who I am? I don't know what my thoughts or my feelings or my opinions are. So that's a real beautiful place for some self-awareness, right? Like some clients will bring up to me, do you remember that Julia Roberts movie, Runaway Bride?
No.
Okay.
Of course I
The
do.
scene that stands out, and I have women bring this up on their own. I don't use this as an illustration. They'll bring it up, but the scene where someone reflects that she eats her eggs, however the partner eats their eggs, and so the question is, how do you actually like your eggs? And that's a great illustration of some of this self-awareness, especially for people who say, I don't know how to be vulnerable because I don't really know what I like. Right?
Right.
I've become so adaptive. Right? That idea that you're so go along to get along, that where do I stand?
Right.
And so that's an important piece. That's a beautiful piece.
Right.
As far as the individual piece of
Right.
developing
It
the
is.
ability to be vulnerable.
You want to hear my runaway bride example?
Yes. Does
Because
it fit?
it fits.
Okay.
It fits. And I've used this in therapy. Yes, I have used a runaway bride example. Um, at the end of the movie, where she, what's the guy's name? Dermot, the guy that plays.
Dylan McDermott? Is it Dylan?
No, it's not Dylan
Oh,
McDermott.
okay.
It's I can't remember his
Okay.
name. But anyways, the main guy. He's Cameron Diaz, who's his love interest.
No. You're mixing up the movies.
Wait, is
My
mixing up
best.
movie?
You're doing My Best Friend's
Oh,
Wedding.
sorry,
Yeah. Richard Gere is the main guy in Runaway Bride.
my bad.
You're right. McDermott is the guy in My Best Friend's Wedding.
Well, can I tell
They're
that one?
very important movies for people that were in
Can
the
I
90s.
tell? Sorry,
Okay,
I'm
just
a huge Julia
distinguishing.
Roberts fan.
I know, she's great.
There was a wedding in both of them.
They're both about weddings,
And
you're
they both have
right.
Julia Roberts.
Yes.
They both have Cameron Diaz.
No.
No, I'm joking.
Okay. No.
Can I tell my example?
You can, but make sure it's from the right movie.
Okay.
Okay.
My best friend's wedding.
Good. Got it. Yeah.
Yes, I use my best friend's
Okay.
wedding example. in
Good.
there.
Okay.
I'll have to adopt your runaway bride one though.
Okay.
So he's chasing Cameron Diaz,
Yes.
and because she has found out whatever, and then Julia Roberts, who's also in love with the dude, is chasing him, right?
Yes.
And then she gets on the phone with her best friend,
I remember.
and she's like telling him like, it's all out now, it's all out in the open, da da da, and he's running after her, and I'm running after him, and he's like, slow down a second or whatever. I haven't seen this in years, so I'm probably butchering it, but he's like, so you're saying like, she's running from him. She's like, yeah, and he's chasing her, and you're chasing him, and then he says, who's chasing you? And that's that moment of clarity for her, of the vulnerable thing for her to do in that moment
Is to not.
is to stop running, stop chasing him. And so, but you got to have some level of self-awareness. And I think, I think it was episode 10, actually, when Whitney came on and talked about those 3 channels of self-awareness. Would be a good episode to go revisit.
Yeah. Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
And I also, though, to kind of take it back to you, this isn't just an individual thing. Like you said, this is also a couple perspective of, when do I think it is more challenging for me to be this way in this relationship? Yeah. Could be that you don't feel like someone's listening.
Right.
They're not giving you cues of this being important, etc.
Just like in the my best friend's wedding example that I gave, couples often they want their partner to respond favorably
Yes.
to them in different ways and the things they're achieving, and so they pursue that. But one of the things that I think is really important to do is, like, if you're like wanting your partner, for example, to be accepting of you, to show compassion towards you, to hear you, you will have a better chance of getting them, I guess, to do that, or inspiring them to do that, if you do it for yourself.
Absolutely.
First, like,
Yeah.
you will be a much more compassionate person to others and inspire compassion in response if you are compassionate towards self.
I agree.
So, like, sometimes the vulnerable thing to do is let it be okay that you're feeling certain ways, so that if you do experience some level of rejection or pushback on it, you won't crawl under a rock or fight back when it happens.
Right. Have a trauma
You
response
will
almost.
say, no, this is okay. It is okay
Yeah.
for me to feel this way.
Yeah.
It is okay for me to get upset right now. It is okay for me to be afraid. It's okay for me to be hurt.
Right.
Even if the way I'm remembering something didn't happen exactly the way I'm remembering it, this is how I remember it.
Right. This is still how
This
it
is how I
feels to me.
experienced it, right? And I think that's a crucial piece.
I do too. And I'll say the last thing about that is we often will use the terms of set and setting, right? So if you're trying to, recognize and build, vulnerability, sometimes you have to, make the set and setting comparable to that, right? Trying to be vulnerable while you're chopping vegetables and feeding the dog, of like, I really wanted to tell you something very important that's hard
Right.
for me. You do have to be mindful of that, right? When we're talking about especially the couple piece, right? And that's something actionable, right? That we can be like, okay, what is the best? How do I do this, and what's the best setting for that?
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's why people want to have a relationship with AI,
I know.
because when like humans, like you think about it, it's like, man, like this is hard enough for myself, and I'm gonna get in a relationship with another human
Another
being,
human.
and that's why I always say, like, sh- one piece of compassion that comes in too is just understanding that um, one thing that's really unique about a committed couple relationship is that it will forever and always require the cooperation of both parties involved moving in the same direction and sync with each other to make that relationship work. It seems like when you think of that, it seems almost daunting.
Miraculous.
Right.
Yeah,
But people do it.
they do. They choose it. How vulnerable is that?
Right. Yeah. It's pretty cool.
Really cool.
Well, I think we solved the world's
Yeah,
problems
I think we
today.
did. We didn't know how we could wrap it up, but we did.
I was a little worried, feeling a little vulnerable that we weren't going to be able to, that we were going to just be subpar therapists and podcast
Oh, that'd be
hosts.
terrible.
Just want to remind everybody again, if you haven't yet, after hearing this amazing episode, give us that 5-star review, to subscribe to our channel, smash that like button, and show up again on our next one. I don't know if we will have another podcast episode this year, but we definitely will be picking back up in January.
Yep.
So thanks for being here.